So welcome to part three of my presentation where I'm taking you through data analysis that I've done over the last approximately 1 month for Wake County metrics. This particular part of the presentation is going to cover Math 1 metrics used by Wake County Public School System. And I hope you'll enjoy it because it's got a lot of interesting data in it. As I've said before, I try to cite my sources in all my charts. Also, I've done a lot of calculations, done a lot of manual manipulations to try to, to gather and digest the data from the North Carolina